Feminist literary criticism is the literary and critical theory that explores the bias in favor of the male gender in literature and which re-examines all literature from a feminist point of view. Feminist criticism generally assumes that a literary work is shaped by the way we read it, and this reading of it is influenced by our own status, gender, and our attitude towards gender. Thus, the feminist literary critic identifies instances of gender inequality in literature. For example, feminist criticism may examine the portrayal of men and women in a story, the power relationships or the imbalance of power between males and females, and the embodiment of masculine and feminine traits in characters.
Feminist criticism became a dominant force in Western literary studies in the late 1970s, when popular feminist theories were applied to linguistic and literary matters. These theories, articulated by Lewis Tyson, include:
women are oppressed by patriarchy economically, politically, socially, and psychologically. Patriarchal ideology is the primary means by which they are kept so. This means that women are subservient by force because society does not give them opportunity for equality.
In every domain where patriarchy reigns, woman is other. She is marginalized, defined only by her difference from male normals and values. The marginalized population is the population that is devalued or excluded in society. Women are the marginalized population because they are viewed as incapable of being independent, making them inferior.
While biology determines our sex, male versus female, culture determines our gender, masculine or feminine. Masculinity refers to a set of traits which are generally associated with men. Similarly, femininity refers to a set of traits which are generally associated with women. These traits are determined by society rather than biology, so it is possible to have a masculine female or a feminine male.
Since the early 1980s, feminist literary criticism has developed and diversified in a number of ways and is now characterized by a global perspective. Regardless of the developments and diversifications, feminist criticism has had one goal: to raise awareness for gender discrimination and create gender equality in society. Feminist criticism has, in many ways, followed the three ways of feminism.
The first wave of feminism began in the late 1700s and continued until the early 1900s. For centuries, women were expected to be the housewives, the homemakers. During the late 18th century and early 19th century, women such as Mary Wollstonecraft, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton encouraged women to go against these standards and fight for reform. Their major goal was to create equal opportunities for women in society, such as equal voting rights and equal access to education. The passing of the 19th Amendment, which granted women suffrage, led to the end of the first wave of feminism.
The second wave of feminism began in the early 1960s and continued until the late 1970s. This was the emergence of a new social movement in North America and Europe, dedicated to raising consciousness about sexism and patriarchy, legalizing abortion and birth control, attaining equal rights in political and economic matters, and gaining sexual liberation. The movement began in 1963 when mother of the movement Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, and President John F. Kennedy's Presidential Commission on the Status of Women released its Report on Gender Inequality. The report, which revealed discrimination against women in American society, along with Friedan's book, which spoke to the discontent of many women, especially housewives, led to the formation of many governmental feminist groups and many independent feminist organizations. The movement grew with legal victories such as the Equal Pay Act of 1963. In 1966, Friedan joined other women and men and funded the National Organization for Women, a feminist organization with the goal of bringing absolute equality to women in society.
The third wave of feminism began in the early 1990s and is going on today. Third wave feminism focuses on resisting the overgeneralized and oversimplified ideas of the second wave of feminism. Mainly, it is about the expansion of the idea that women are of many different ethnic, national, religious, and cultural backgrounds. It discourages the stereotype of a white woman in a heterosexual relationship or marriage with another white man and encourages society to take into account the marginalized population. The third wave is about implementing contemporary gender and race theories, such as same sex couples and interracial marriages, into society.
Feminist literary criticism during the first and second waves focused mainly on equality in the field of literature for women, the representation of women in literature, including fictional characters, and the discrimination of certain books due to their female authors. Feminist criticism in the third wave has become a lot more diverse. It still focuses on the position of women in literary society, but it also focuses on the political and social implications that a certain work has on the status of women overall. In the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, there are many situations where feminist critical theory can be applied in order to better understand Twain's viewpoints of women and the position of women in society at the time.
When Huck decides to go into town, he decides to disguise himself as a girl. Jim and Huck both have a set idea on what all girls are like. For example, Jim says that Huck does not walk like a girl, implying that all girls walk the same. This scene shows the standards and stereotypes by which women were expected to live and act by.
When Huck gets to the town dressed as a girl, he talks to a woman, Mrs. Judith Loftus, and eventually mentions resting and continuing on through the town in the dark, but the woman would not allow Huck to go without her husband walking with him. The woman wouldn't let him go because she thought a girl couldn't handle herself walking alone at night. This indicates the stereotype of a woman being weak and vulnerable and a man being strong and brave. If Huck wasn't disguised as a girl, the woman wouldn't have been so concerned. But society views women as fragile and weak, incapable of taking care of themselves. Women need a man to protect them and provide for them.
When the woman reveals that she knows Huck is a boy, she comments on how she could tell because he threaded the needle incorrectly. She also talks about how girls throw a certain way. Through Miss Loftus's advice to Huck, Twain makes a lot of judgments about the way women are supposed to act in society.
Another part of the novel that would receive criticism from feminists is the scene where the Duke and the King scam the Wilkes sisters. The Wilkes sisters are women of high caliber with wealth and status. When the three girls encounter two men who claim to be their uncles, they carelessly give away their deceased father's fortune to these con men with complete confidence against the advice of the doctor, who sees clearly that these men are fakes. In the end, Huck reveals to one of the sisters, Mary Jane, that their uncles are indeed con men. Afterwards, he forces Mary Jane to go stay with the neighbor so she does not give away his intention of retrieving the fortune from the Duke and the King.
This scene belittles women in the way Twain portrays the sisters as clueless and gullible, even though they are high class. Not one of the three sisters has the brain or common sense to even consider that they are being scammed. They blindly put their trust in men whom they've never met due to their emotional attachment. Twain also emphasizes the superiority of men through the doctor, who continually advises the girls to not trust the Duke and the King. This shows that the man is capable of thinking clearly and cautiously, while the woman is illogical and reckless without a man's advice. Not only does Twain show how females are easy to fool, but he also shows that they need a man to fix the mess. Huck sends Mary Jane away after telling her the truth because she would be an impediment to his plan. This shows how women were seen as helpless creatures who had to rely on men to survive in the real world.
Tom Sawyer's aunt, Sally Phelps, is an example of the typical housewife. Mrs. Phelps is completely dependent on her husband, Silas, for financial support. She is the master of the household, in charge of the slaves and the children, but her husband is still superior to her. He was still her voice. This shows the inequality between a man and a woman, created partially because of financial capability. A woman was not allowed to go out and work at the time, so she was forced to rely on her husband. In turn, the man had the upper hand in the relationship.
Tom and Huck accidentally release harmless garden snakes in the Phelps house when they are planning out how to steal Jim away. The snakes were harmless, but they frightened Aunt Sally to the point where she ran around and screamed hysterically. Uncle Silas's only reaction to the situation was annoyance at his wife. The two differing reactions show the stereotype under which women were perceived. Women were again depicted as weak, easily frightened by harmless creatures, while the man was depicted as strong and brave, not at all bothered by the snakes. Bravery is an important trait of masculinity. Men are expected to remain calm and courageous in frightening situations, while women are expected to be scared and distressed. Twain reinforces this stereotype by depicting Aunt Sally as a weak, fragile woman who is easily upset.
The main idea of feminist critical theory is to read the literature from the viewpoint of a feminist to identify gender stereotypes and discrimination in the text. This can help the reader better understand the author and the time period in which the story takes place. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn took place during the first wave of feminism, when the fight for gender equality was just becoming a serious issue. Twain uses female characters in his novel by putting them in stereotypical positions. This shows that he has also had views which inferiorized women in society.